Willkommen in einem anderen video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 4 of my game design series of videos. In this video I'll be providing a brief overview of World War II and Cold War company scale rules. This represents the 5th update to this specific video, covering more rules and cleaning up the format. While this video series was originally designed for those wishing to design their own rules, the video format has been changed into an overview of the rules available at this scale, as that seems to be what most people wish to view. Some discussion on game systems will occur at the end of the video for those interested. This specific video covers rules, which I call company scale, where each element or base represents a company of infantry or 15 to 20 tanks or armoured fighting vehicles. This allows a player to command a couple of standard regiments, brigades, or even a division. Prior to 1986, this rule scale did not exist as a commercial set of rules, but there were many gamers who had an interest in larger scale games and were waiting for something like this. This may have been due to board gaming, but when the scale first appeared, partially in 1986, there was indeed a lot of excitement. Unfortunately, the initial rules were too complex to be popular, so the excitement quickly drained away. In 1995, this was finally resolved, and the popularity of this scale has grown to this day. Designing rules at this scale was not a simple process for figure gamer rule designers. Great Battles of World War II had a very board game feel to it, and Corps Commander created a game system which seemed almost company scale, but this was actually not the case. But really, it was far too complex. It was only in 2007 that a true company-scale micro-armor set of rules that became available that players could use. If you want a game that can be completed comfortably within a day, you need to limit the number of elements per side to 50 or less. If each element represents a company, then a player can be expected to field about 2 regiments. If a regiment consists of about 9 to 20 elements, our limit is 2 to 3 regiments per side, allowing players to actually command a division if the divisional structure is correct. While not important in most cases, rules which use this scale normally employ combat units which are battalion-sized. While most rules do not have any specific rules for what I call combat units, most players keep their elements into battalion-sized units. In some cases, the rules themselves, especially at this scale, could employ a form of battalion headquarters, which would require the players to keep the battalion together. This is the case for LWRS and Panzer Corps, which do require players to form battalion-sized combat units. At this scale, the grouping into battalion-sized combat units is more common and does represent a form of battalion combat level, but of course there is no actual HQ element required in this case. Let's now look at headquarters. Almost all sets of rules possess 2 levels of command, a CNC, which represents the player, several subordinate sub-commanders, and then the combat units, or in some cases the individual elements themselves. At this scale, the CNC is a divisional HQ, and the sub-commanders are regiment brigade HQs. This chart lists some of the company scale micro-armor rules which were published since 1986. Corps Commander claimed to be a company scale, but the most you could say was that it was a half company scale, and I've covered these rules in the platoon scale section of this series. I've included it here because the optimal size of an element is actually half a company for a host of reasons, so it should be played at half company scale. Thus, it's a hybrid set of rules which exists in both scales. This especially is the case for the World War II version of these rules. The first thing you may notice is the lack of published rules at this scale. While the interest in platoon scale rules took a lot of the gaming designers' attention, company scale rules proved very difficult to design and were less popular, for the designers at least. The size and composition of companies varied so much it was difficult to use the systems used in lower scale rules, requiring a lot more effort and thought. The other problem was what to do with support weapons, which were often of platoon size. Lightning War, Red Storm and Panzer Corps both addressed these issues with very innovative ideas, and in the short life of this scale, a surprising level of innovation has occurred. What is also very surprising is how playable these 2 sets of rules are. While most of the images used in this video are from my games, I've added several Panzer Corps game images from the internet to add variety and bling. At this scale, the early rules used 6mm figures. However, rules such as Panzer Corps used a figure scale of 15mm. I expect 15mm was selected in this case to capitalise on players with Flames of War force mixers. However, outside of those rules, most of the gaming seems to be around the 6mm area. Bruce Reed Taylor's Corps Commander was the first published, sort of, company scale set of rules designed solely for micro armour. I generally class this at platoon scale. As the modern period, most elements are platoon scale, but I must admit, in many cases, each element did represent a single company. As a result, while platoon scale, this is also company scale, hybrid set of rules. The rules play like a standard platoon scale set of rules, but its use of strength points is unique. While this concept is unpopular in platoon scale rules, this concept is more viable in company scale rules. Strength points are used by some of the other rules in this scale, in some form or another. The major handicap for these rules is players would expect to command a division in a company scale set of rules, but the combination of complexity and its half company true scale means a regiment is all you could really field for a reasonable game. It is really that places this in the platoon scale group. The first set of pure company scale micro armour rules is Great Battles of World War II, Volume 1 by Bruce McFay. While these are rules designed for micro armour, the playing area was so abstracted it resembled a board game. As a result, it had a very board game feel to it. I don't mean game system or board game systems. I mean it actually felt like a board game. It did include logistics in it, which apart from Corps Commander is not common, considering in platoon and squad scale rules it's normally not a factor. Unfortunately, its scale did not match its intentions. Intended to be a set of rules which allowed for large scale campaigns to be played, its scale of 1 in 5,900 to 1 in 7,800 was not really suitable. The scope of the rules really called for an even larger scale. The figures also represent actual units rather than troops, so I'd assume some record keeping or a lot of record keeping was required. It was a good attempt, and this represented one way of dealing with creating a company scale set of rules. I'm uncertain when DivTac rules became available. The earliest date I could find was 2017, but I suspect these rules were actually created back well before 2000. The rules are created by Ian Shaw, who created a host of content back in the 1980s and 1990s, and he created a set of rules which allowed you to refight the entire Normandy campaign. From a practical point of view, I would suspect a reasonable game length would require you to field 1 or 2 divisions. Refighting Normandy would represent a monster game requiring hundreds of elements per side. These rules have a large focus on command, with HQs needing a die roll based on morale to allow subordinate elements to do anything. Supply is also included, with lorries moving supplies to the units. Fire combat uses a 10-sided dice with just over a dozen modifiers for range fire and less than 12 for close assault. Element specs are provided for all the formations which fought at Normandy. In 2007, Schwerpunkt by Pete Broccoli became available. They were available for a small charge and delivered in the form of a Word document. Later they were made available for free in return for an optional donation. The designer has disappeared and the rules themselves are almost impossible to find, although I've patched up together a best effort copy on the Schwerpunkt IO group site. The writing style is rather annoying, but once you cut out all that, they are an interesting effort at providing you with a company scale set of rules. Very simple, easy to play, but with a serious lack of supporting material. Players would be required to do a lot of work in order to create a reasonable scenario. The company's sized elements were part of a battalion and needed to act as a single battalion sized formation. This was an innovation used by most subsequent company scale systems and was a real game system innovation and proved very effective. I suspect the first version of Lightning War was made available on the internet in 2008, and I think it only covered World War II, written by Andrew Stevenson and available as free rules. This was an example where a free set of rules actually gained good traction. By 2013, Lightning War Red Storm was made available, which allowed for modern conflicts as well. This was very popular in the UK and allowed for quick and playable games. The only issue was a lack of supporting material such as army lists, equipment lists and scenarios. Some effort was made in the UK to provide this. I have reformatted the rules, calling it Bevölkerungskrieg, and posted it as a large body of supporting material on the Bevölkerungskrieg IO group site, including extensive scenarios. The rules use company-size elements, each consisting of 3 steps or strength points. The elements form battalion, and the basic combat unit was the battalion. The combat system used a simple lot of D6 dice combat mechanism, and the sequence of play was an initiative-based movement phase, followed by a fire phase. There was nothing revolutionary, but the package worked extremely well. In 2008, Panzerkorps was published, designed by Manis J. Granino. These are very playable, quick and generally good rules. The rule layout is designed to attract young player, which has turned off many older players. Once you get your head around the plethora of colours and create your own quick reference sheet, they are very playable. These rules also group companies and battalions. However, they have the concept of support elements, which are actually platoons. These sit at the rear of a battalion, provide benefit to all the elements. If the battalion suffers losses, these support elements are removed first, but the core company elements are never removed. I find this a very innovative idea which overcomes many of the largest problems with company scale rules. The rules have good scenario support and are the most popular of all the company scale rules out there today. If you want to get in the scale, this is the set of rules I would strongly recommend you to move into. Field of Battle World War II remind me a lot of LWRS. They are very abstract and are designed for each player to command a division over several days of combat. There is no logistics and it's designed for quick play involving those elements of combat which players enjoy the most, or elements of combat which players enjoy the most. The manoeuvre element is the battalion. The game plays very quickly and has a low learning curve. The game uses cards to regulate movement and combat, and the cards have the effect on them, so you don't need to reference the rules when you select a card. It only costs impetus to flip a card. Each unit that card applies to it may act upon what the card says you can act upon. When I first discovered these rules, I was surprised how good they were. These rules are designed for quick, fun games, and while historically they may annoy some players, from a game point of view, they are very good to introduce new players to the hobby. If you want to get into this scale initially and you have minimal knowledge of figure gaming, this may be a better set of rules for you to initially go into. Not quite mechanized, while not technically an element company scale set of rules, is actually a half battalion scale of rules. So it's again another of these hybrid set of rules that fit between two scales. The version I have here is from 2015, but apparently this is around since 1985 in some form. These rules are old school, using defined orders and umpires. Although it's implied umpires may be optional, the sequence of play is complex. Is a complex I go, you go system, and I must admit I had real issues understanding the rules. I suspect if you had someone teaching you, it would all click into place and you'd be able to get into the rules very quickly. 5 Corps Brigade Commander puts you in the largest of the 5 Corps series games yet, according to the blurb. Each stand is a company, supported by platoon level attachments. A typical game fields a brigade regiment on each side and is playable to an hour to 1.5 hours on a 3x3 foot table or even smaller. With the fast-playing 5 Corps mechanics, you have an unpredictable turn sequence, forcing you to adapt to the unfolding battle, and a quick-firing mechanism that tells you immediately what happens without any follow-up damage rolls or morale tests. Covering from the interwar period to the present day, Brigade Commander also includes campaign rules, reference sheets, tool for solo play, and a scenario generator for a complete gaming experience. I'm a bit surprised that it only supports up to brigade scale. If it's truly company, I would have expected divisional scale, so I suppose the rules are focused on very short games. If you wanted to go to a 3-hour game, I would hope that you would be able to field a division. These look interesting. I don't have actually a copy myself, but they certainly look interesting and something I will investigate in the future. Bloody Big Battles World War II is still under development. You can get a beta version of Bloody Big Battles World War II on the IO Group site, and it was written by Bob McKenzie. Bob also has his own site with a more up-to-date version of the rules. These rules are based on the Bloody Big Battle series of rules. It has 2 stated scales, battalion and regimental. This will cover the battalion scale. The battalion scale uses an element company scale, with the elements grouped into larger elements representing a battalion or larger bases. Each large element or combat unit is 3 times larger than the standard element, with standard elements placed inside the larger element to reflect its combat capability and strength. It uses the same system which Schwerpunkt used back in 2007, where the standard element represents strength points. Unlike Schwerpunkt, where the standard element resides in the battalion, all combat is purely a battalion-centric. The elements represent unique strength points. Standard elements could detach and move and fight independently, but this was an exception, and actually the only reason why this fits in the company scale area is because you can actually do this, otherwise I'd put it in the battalion. The true innovation of these rules was the use of a large element or base or movement tray instead of lots of small elements. This overcame a host of issues and offered a lot more flavour than previous battalion scale rules could possess. Basically, the battalion could consist of a specific type of armour and possess different equipment mixes, and this was reflected in its combat ability. Because this combat capacity was based on the elements within the big movement tray, minimal record creeping was required. You can see a big element combat capacity by simply looking at its combat component elements. I'm not sure why I put this in the company area. The only reason why it's here is because you can actually detach the individual elements and they can fight as a company. But once again, this really resides in the battalion area. The beta version of the rules are available in the Grosse Schlachten.io group site, and you can, with some effort, use these to play a game. Recently, I created a true company scale set of rules using my Quick Play KK version 6 game system, which can be found on the Core Command.io group website. I call this Division Commander. Apart from the fact that, like all Core Commander sets of rules, they use strength points, this was a quick and easy set of rules to develop and set up and has real potential at this scale. While more complex than LWRS, these rules do offer more detail and may be mostly useful for play on a smaller playing area, 3 by 2 foot area with a smaller number of elements. This is a playing area size I've been experimenting with, allowing both players to remain seated for the entire game. Time will tell if these rules offer sufficiently unique benefit, which would allow it to gain any form of traction. Currently, I tend to prefer using LWRS, but nonetheless, this is definitely in my back list of things to look at in more detail. This is the latest version of Rapid Fire called Rapid Fire Reloaded. While the standard rules use a platoon element scale, there is the option of using a company or small company element scale. This option uses the 1 to 45 infantry figure scale or 1 to 15 vehicle scale for divisional level battles. I'm uncertain how the rules cater for this new scale. I assume the ground and time scale is multiplied by 3 and the fire ranges are reduced somewhat. Otherwise, no changes to the basic game system. Most players of these do not use them for divisional conflicts, so there are no example games I could find which played at that scale. Considering the low cost of the rules, I feel players interested in this scale would be well advised to try them. In its short history, company scale rules have introduced many game system innovation. I must admit many of these innovations are the result of attempting to overcome the issues with this scale, but the development has been impressive nonetheless. If we ignore the board game style rules such as Great Battles of World War II, the following innovations occurred in this scale. The development of the battalion combat unit concept consisting of several company-size elements. The concept of support elements which are platoon-sized and provide benefit to the battalion as a whole. The use of big bases or movement trays containing several standard elements. The concept of strength points or steps and a variable game turn length. The first innovation was the introduction of the multi-element unit. This concept is common in the world of ancients and Napoleonic miniatures, but not so much in the world of micro-armor miniatures. The benefit of this is a player does not need to worry about platoon-size formations, because all the equipment is combined at a battalion level and then divided by the scale of the element. Thus, if a battalion consists of 60 tanks, you would end up with 4 elements. Each element may or may not represent a company or platoon or whatever, but the total battalion strength is accurate. For support forces, if a battalion consists of 6 sections of mortars scattered across 3 companies, you simply get the total number of mortars, in this case 12, round to the closest whole number, which results in 1 element. This idea simplifies the creation of historically accurate army lists, but may be annoying to the purist. Panzer Corps brings in the concept of support elements. In some cases, a battalion possesses a number of weapons which does not warrant an element. This can be rounded up to the next level of command, or it can be used as a platoon-sized support element. If used as a support element, it's placed in the rear of the battalion and provides some benefit to the whole battalion. It is a very clever solution to the issue of what to do with platoon-sized support formations when your basic element scale is company. Another method to resolve the problem of having variable size elements is to use a strength point system. This way the strength of elements can vary in a historical manner. It also allows for the slow attrition of formations. The problem is keeping track of the strengths of each element, which dramatically increase the efforts of playing a game. Lightning War Red Storm minimises the administration by only tracking strength by battalion, but when there are several different element types, this can also represent too much administration in some cases. The system could be used successfully for smaller games. Panzer Corps also introduced the concept of each game turn representing a variable number of sub-game turns or phases. This allows for the variability of combat over an extended period, such as a day. This has been done by other rules using different systems, in those cases allowing elements 1 to 3 moves in a game turn, based on quality, initiative, morale, whatever. Panzer Corps takes this further. Personally, I'm uncertain what problem variable game turns solves, as during periods of no activity, players could simply flip through the game turns by doing nothing. As for providing a variable number of mini game turns to achieve an objective, this could be done by simply starting the game earlier in the day or later in the day, based on a simple die roll. The only solution I think it assists with is high-quality troops doing more in a given time period. Once again, this can be achieved using other systems, such as an initiative-based system described earlier, without adding new rules. It's a nice idea and works well, but from a simplicity point of view, there may be easier ways of achieving the same objective. I suspect using this is more a player or designer preference rather than a specific solution or optimal solution to an annoying issue. But look, I have to admit, it does work, and it does work well in Panzer Corps. As with the other rule scales I've covered, the other critical factor is completeness. Creating the rules is only a small part, and providing a complete product or solution is really what you need to aim for. A host of supporting material needs to be created in order to allow players to quickly assemble an army and play a game. Schwerpunkt lacked any supporting material, so quickly faded away. Great Battles of World War II, Volume 1, focused on a specific campaign and nationality, so proved not to be that popular outside of Canada. Corps Commander, while being the most complex and difficult set of rules, gained reasonable popularity with experienced players because it was surprisingly complete, and some people did create additional supporting material. Lightning War Red Storm, a very good set of rules, was held back by its lack of supporting material, which today is generally resolved because of other people generating content for it. Panzer Corps has the best story in this area. Many of the rules here, starting with Schwerpunkt, are battalion-based, with elements being part of the larger battalion-size element. The concept is the battalion is the envelope big element, which is made up of standard-size company elements. This way, the element takes the place of strength points and are removed if they suffer casualties. The player can see the strength of the battalion by looking at the number of standard elements in it. In this case, these rules are better described as battalion scale rules. I class these as company scale only because companies can still conduct movement and combat independently, and while the rules ask you to keep the elements together, they can be separated if required. Finally, combat is still based on the element in many of these rules. Thus, it's better classed as a company scale set of rules when this occurs. The scenario story with company scale rules are very similar to the platoon scale rules, except there is a larger focus on historical scenarios. You can really see this with Panzer Corps. At this scale, it's easier to find historical scenarios, although it is surprisingly difficult to find adequate historical references to help you build those scenarios. As with my other rules videos, the main driver which results in a set of rules being popular can be summed up with these 5 basic points: playability, ease of learning, 3 to 6 hour game duration, supporting army lists and equipment lists and scenarios. Panzer Corps has the best story, with Lightning War Red Storm close behind. The only puzzle here is, why are there so few rules at this scale? Squad and platoon scales are well catered for, and as we'll discover, there is a reasonable number of battalion scale rules, but at company scale the range is comparatively small, especially with commercially published games or rules. Corps Commander was the first, followed by Great Battles of World War II Volume 1, but they were both unusual rules. Corps Commander was really a half company scale, and Great Battles had a very board game feel to it, which is not bad, but does place it in a special category. The first real commercial rules for this scale was Panzer Corps, followed by Field of Battle. Rapid fire may fit into this group as well, but these rules were not really initially designed for this scale. While there is a lot of freeware rules, the list is rather short for commercially provided rules. My feeling is players who want to move to company scale are just as happy to skip this and move up to battalion scale. On the other hand, players who prefer the ability to move individual elements gravitate to platoon scale. Corps Commander actually fits nicely in between, but its complexity inhibits its ability to bridge these two scales. Company scale is also about the highest you can go and retain the ability to recognise an element's capacity by looking at the figure. Once we move to battalion scale, a host of specialist vehicles never appear, and for those who do, a lot of rounding assumptions are required. There are ways to minimise this, but you do lose the ability to field those rare vehicles and weapons. Even at company level it's difficult, but just possible, which may be the main selling point of this scale. On the other hand, if this is what you wish, platoon scale gives you a better solution. So while I was very excited about this scale when I first found rules which supported it, I quickly moved to battalion scale for larger conflicts and stay with platoon scale if I wanted that tactical feel. And so I have to conclude episode 4 of my video on micro armour game system design, which in this case provides an overview of company scale figure gaming rules for World War II and Cold War periods. Alle guten Dinge, kommen zu einem Ende.